Welcome to the UK Medical Freedom Alliance. We are the most recognised and respected organisation campaigning for your right to informed consent, bodily autonomy and medical choice. We are the voice of ethical medicine. Hi everybody, welcome to the UK Medical Freedom Alliance, and this is one of our new medical ethics reports. So we're changing the way that we're doing our videos, and they're all going to be based around medical ethics, which of course is what we exist for in any event. And what we're going to do today is just discuss all sorts of things that really have come to Liz's mind over the last couple of weeks or so, and mine to a certain extent. But Liz, thank you very much for joining me, and well, hopefully making one of these new videos a great success, which I'm sure it will be. And we'll keep it short, sharp, punchy, but get lots of detail in there. So thanks again.
Yeah, definitely. I think this is such a great format to kind of keep people updated, because I mean, every day I do read a newspaper each day over breakfast, and I'm just picking up on so many stories which are concerning, which relate to medical ethics, and it's hard to keep on top of them all and sort of, put out open letters on everything. But we need to start, being able to communicate this to the public. So I love this idea of a medical ethics report, and I know this is your baby, so very, very privileged to be on here. Very happy.
Oh no, thank you. Visit our website to get immediate access to our media and presentations, our campaigns, our podcast, our Substack, legal help with support, and our open letters. The address is ukmedfreedom.org. That's ukmedfreedom.org. You can sign up there to receive our newsletter, so you're notified then of our new campaigns, our open letters and calls to action, and any other important updates. Oh, by the way, you can donate there too.
So I thought the first thing we could do is just talk about what we've been doing, what we've put out over the last couple of months since the new year. So just so that we can raise people's, awareness of what we've been doing. So, Sarah Myhill is doing some fantastic work. She's, people may not know, but she's one of the directors of UKMFA, obviously a passionate speaker on medical ethics, informed consent, the Hippocratic Oath, has been such a warrior. And, how many has she now won against the GMC? 46.
I think it's 46-0, which 46 for a match is a pretty good score. Yeah.
Yeah, and you've done some great podcasts with her. So anyone who wants to hear her ongoing battles with the GMC, I think there's another one in the pipeline, isn't it? It's the minute that they lose against her, they've already got another case, and they won't let her deregister, because all she wants to do is just cease her registration. She's not working with a prescription pad as a doctor anymore. So
that's right. Well, the only way they can go after her is actually that they have to keep her license running as a member of the GMC, and in order to then persecute her. Why they just don't walk away quietly, I've no idea. But they obviously feel they don't want to do that, which is sad.
Yeah. So she has now kind of decided to take on the GMC in the way that's really working in America, which is through freedom of information requests. So you could go on to our website to see she's written a big open letter with freedom of information to the GMC, basically all around information that supported what is their evidence base during COVID. What evidence base did they rely on to support their claim that the COVID jabs were safe and effective? And she's made a very detailed FOI for various stages of the pandemic or COVID era around. So the evidence base for that, and also, that's her one to Chris Whitty. She's done two different FOIs. So one is for the Department of Health. So the one to the Department of Health, Chris Whitty, is basically saying, what was your evidence based? And then the one to the GMC is what documents relating to informed consent for COVID vaccines. And she's going to be on it because they have a limited time to respond. And so, you have the option if they don't respond or they don't respond properly. And with the right information, you can then take it onto the Information Commissioner, which we actually had some success with back in 2 or 3 years ago.
No,
and
no, and I think we're really hoping this is not going to just help her, but all the other doctors that are being persecuted
yeah,
in terms of the way the GMC runs, which and it's so surprising because they seem to ignore rules of evidence because they're an employment tribunal
yeah.
and not really a court of law. So I can understand they've probably got their own way of working.
Mhm.
However, it does seem extremely unfair that they don't allow witness statements and the like on behalf of the doctors. It seems to go against all moral codes, really.
Yeah, and speaking of the GMC, so we're really concerned about this. The persecution of ethical doctors, basically silencing doctors who are whistleblowing patient safety issues, which is just so fundamental to the safe practice of medicine. So we've put in another joint open letter in support of Asim Malhotra because he is continuing to be hounded by the GMC in the same way as Sarah has been around. So they won't let him go either. So us, Doctors for Patients UK, Heart and Roz's group have put together another letter to help support his case against them and his evidence bundle. And we're currently working on a letter to support Dave Cartland because that will be a letter not to the GMC because obviously they've struck him off, but now the disclosures barring authority DBS has put him on the adults and children's vulnerable adults and children's barring list, which
Yes.
is just unbelievable and so extreme and such an example of how these regulators and sort of authorities are working together to silence people and destroy their lives and make an example out of them. And I know you've spoken to Dave, so maybe you can talk a bit more to that.
Well, it's a total overreach, and it's you really can't believe the way that the pattern works. I mean, you would think that a professional organisation like the GMC would behave in a professional and ethical manner. That's supposedly what they exist for. But when you read into the pattern of what's happened, so in terms of there's been no actual patient allegations made, but there's been allegations made by other organisations, other doctors, which don't really make sense. But the allegations have been made. Many of them have been discarded because they're rubbish, but a few seem to have been gathered together, which they've then used to go after him to try and take his licence away.
Mm-hmm.
But once they also do that, they're also overreaching into other areas of his life, into his personal life, and attacking his great love of football, for example. And it can't be an accident because they wouldn't go after you for football. They wouldn't come after me for football. So they know that that is a key part of his life. And they've chosen that to put this DBS check in place, which then prevents him from not only playing football, which makes no sense because you don't need a DBS check to play football, but it means he can't interact with other children. And they're even reaching now into his own life, his own children.
Mm.
And they won't allow him to transport children from home to the match and back again. They won't allow him to be a supporter at a match unless he sits quietly and says nothing.
That is absolutely absurd because, how many football matches, think of all the stadiums full of people watching Arsenal or, any of the big clubs. Do you have a DBS screening to get in?
No.
Or like I've been to watch many, many sports matches with where my kids have been playing. Nobody's been checking all the parents to make sure none of them are DBS bar because it is not a risky situation. It wouldn't matter.
Right.
But it feels the most cruel and unusual punishment that they are literally scapegoating him and not just satisfied with robbing him of his medical license and destroying his ability to work as a doctor, but they it's like they want to destroy him, and
That's
they
what it
will
feels
not
like.
rest.
I mean, he's a referee.
Yeah.
So once he gave up playing football, he became a referee.
Mm-hmm.
And he can't even do that. Even to the point they've indicated he can't referee a match where they've got jumpers for goalposts. It's not even an official FA match. It doesn't come under the Football Association, and yet they're still reaching into that. And I did question during the interview actually the powers that they actually have. I mean, I cannot for one moment believe they really have the power to do that, but they would take any opportunity to make life difficult for him.
Yeah, and I think this is really concerning. You know, whatever your views are on, you know, how Dave conducted himself online and all the rest of it, actually, this is unjust. This is scapegoating. This is cruel and barbaric, and we can't allow that, because once they can act above the law, and you know, his whole GMC tribunal, if you read his book, was a kangaroo court. You know, it's dangerous for all of us, because then they can, you know, single out anyone and just act with impunity, which seems to be what's going on at the moment. So this is why we're getting this joint letter to the DBS, which can be forwarded to the Football Association, signed by loads of doctors, just to say this is you know, completely disproportionate and completely unfair, and actually this is not following due process.
No, and I think it would probably be good to see the published process that the GMC are supposed to follow, their own published process, because I can't see how it could possibly be so that is the way that it's published, that's the rules they follow.
And also it'd be interesting to get a subject access request to see who has been corresponding with the FA and the DBS with, you know, about Dave, who has been putting pressure on them. You know, are they acting completely autonomously, you know, following their due process, or are they being told what to do, or coerced or pushed into doing something? Because we, you know, I'm not going to talk about the Epstein files, but, you know, we are seeing now how utterly corrupt so many of these organizations are at the top, and how, you know, compromat seems to be being used. People are just acting above the law. There's this sort of Epstein class, isn't there?
Yes.
Of people who don't believe that the rules apply to them, and they just are manipulating everything to serve their best interests and not the public. And it was interesting. There was a story, I'm just going to look over here. I don't know if you saw the former head of the UK drugs regulator, the former head of the MHRA. We just love the MHRA. So he was the head of the MHRA from 2014, I think, to 2019, something like that, 2013 to 2019. He's going to be struck off by the GMC because he failed to reveal that he was convicted for child sex offences in 2024. So that's 2 years where he was actually had a conviction for a child sex offence.
Yeah.
And the GMC didn't pick up on this. So there isn't some process whereby people who have, you know, acted really appallingly. I mean, this isn't just some sort of Twitter spat. This is someone who is convicted of a criminal offence. Interestingly, got a suspended sentence. How does that work? He was a former paediatrician back in the day, who then went into the drugs industry, who then went into the MHRA. And when he left the MHRA, he ended up at the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. So it's all, you just see how this world works. And he was convicted of child sex offences, and then didn't tell the GMC because he was still registered as a doctor. And he's trying to argue that he's done everything he can to mitigate, and he's not a risk. And even though he doesn't see patients anymore, he needs to keep his licence. Well, and then you just see people like Sarah Myhill or Dave Cartland with not a single patient complaint, not a single criminal offence or conviction, just, you know, having the whole book thrown at them.
Yeah, and punished via the process.
Yes.
Even if they're not found guilty of anything, it's too late now because they've already been punished.
Yeah.
And they've punished for being ethical and speaking out when they felt they needed to, speaking out when others should have done, but turned their backs and started gaslighting. No, I mean, they've been extremely brave, and as David suggested, he feels like he's, you know, a very strong cohort actually of, of people that, have been absolutely amazing, and he looks up to them, to the likes of Sam White, and to 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 Sarah, and
Yeah.
to Emma Cluskey,
Jane
the
and Jane
rest, and
Donegan.
on it goes and on it goes, and and a seam, and there's so many that have spoken out and been very, very brave and have suffered as a result. And in the meantime, those that couldn't be asked, or were just too frightened to say anything, in the meantime, are just looked after and mollycoddled in their little surgeries. And, yes, I'm sure they've got a tough life like every other doctor has, and it's not easy. But this was a severe breakdown of medical ethics and moral codes, and they had the strength to speak out.
Yeah, but these high profile cases send such a powerful message to other doctors. You do not put your head above the parapet,
Yeah,
because you will have everything taken from you. And it's very clear that that is the message that is intended.
yeah.
So yeah, so that's we're going to be doing quite a lot on that this year, I think, trying to tackle this, because without the doctor patient relationship needs the doctor to be acting in the best interest of the patient in front of them. That is the thing that ensures patient safety. And if that doctor cannot raise safety concerns, we've seen this, haven't we, everywhere. We see it with these sort of stories about lots of deaths going on in a certain hospital, but then whistleblowers being silenced or ridiculed or sacked or whatever, and then people die. I mean, this causes death and huge suffering, and I mean, obviously the Lucy Letby case, that's looking increasingly like that's been a massive miscarriage of justice, to scapegoat somebody for failings in the
Yeah.
hospital, because it's so much easier to take down one person than to pay the massive compensation, and also for that sort of trust to admit it was their failings that were leading to babies' deaths. And so I know there's a call for a retrial, but I don't know how that's going. But I'm reading a lot on that. And
Well, I really hope she gets that. And
yeah,
it's it reminds me. I mean, I witnessed this, many, many years ago, back in 2001. My dad died in London hospital as a result of basically a botched biopsy.
mm-hmm.
And he had many complications, and I realized that they did have an issue, but it was the biopsy that caused the death ultimately. But I felt then, and I described it then, as they were, circling the wagons, as it were, and that so the NHS were inside the circle, and they were repelling all us that wanted to get more information and get some justice.
Mm-hmm.
And it was quite clear in the coroner's court that we were never going to get a real explanation. It was a bit of a whitewash, really. And I think I've had that opinion ever since. And so it's a long time ago, and things haven't changed for the better even since then.
Yeah, the system covers up and protects the system, doesn't it?
Yeah.
And individuals can just be thrown to the wolves and kind of sacrificed to save the system. And I think this is a really dangerous culture that is going on in the NHS at the moment. And I don't know whether you've noticed that increasingly the NHS is becoming dehumanized. I noticed I don't know if you remember, I did a presentation, a big ethics presentation last autumn in York to the UK column. And I was talking about this 10-year plan that Wes Streeting had just ruled out. And he basically was saying that they want to move from hospital to community, i.e. you can't get a bed, you've just got to look after yourself at home in some sort of AI hospital bed, from analog to digital, and from treating sickness to prevention. And basically I am just now seeing it, and the whole document was all about sort of sustainable future, patient controlled. It had all of these sort of sound bites, but you could see what it was doing. It was basically sort of patients were becoming data, and doctors were going to be distant. And I was talking to one of my own patients the other day, and he said, He'd rung 3 weeks ago to get an in-person appointment with a doctor. Well, he didn't even get to speak to a receptionist. He spoke to an AI receptionist. I mean, which I was shocked about because I've not heard that. And I'd love if people could send us their stories of this, because that was the first time I'd heard that. It was not possible to get in front of a doctor at all. So he got a phone appointment for 3 weeks hence. So, he had to wait, having talked to this AI thing for 3 weeks. And then his appointment's not an appointment. It's not a slot. Sometime late in the afternoon. So,
Yeah, that's right. Oh,
so
yeah,
what are you
yeah,
supposed to do? Like, that is
yeah.
not a service culture. That is not a service. That is treating you like a delivery slot, like an Amazon delivery slot. It'll be sometime between 12 and 6.
Yeah, no, I've had this personally. I know exactly that. I mean, it wasn't an AI receptionist, but the appointment was booked in exactly the same way. And it's absolutely crazy. Funnily enough, just today I should be speaking to my consultant this afternoon. That is also a phone call.
Yeah.
Once a year, I get a 5-minute phone call from a consultant. I've not set eyes on this man for 5 years.
Which is shocking, because doctors are going to be becoming very de-skilled now. They are no longer putting their hands on patients regularly, and you need to keep that up to be good at picking up signs. And we need to be in the room with people, to smell their breath, or just sense their demeanor, or see how they walk across the room towards you and you go, oh gosh, you look really sick. All of these things, these subtle things, and then, doing a full clinical examination, we're going to be missing stuff. And the whole system soon, it won't even be a phone call, will it? It'll be an AI doctor.
Yeah, and I honestly think that it's just a tick box exercise anyway.
Yeah.
He's just justifying his position, because if he
Yeah.
doesn't make the calls, then they're going to say, well, how are you supporting your patients?
Yeah.
So he's just phones a 5-minute phone call, run through them on a particular day, tick the box. Yes, I made the call. They said they were fine. Thank you very much. So I'll see them next year. And that's it. I'll get another
That's
letter.
not medicine.
No,
That is
I'll
not
get another
medicine.
letter. Don't worry, in about 2 weeks' time, which is booking for next February. Same thing.
So we're no longer seeing medicine really being practiced. This is just people management, patient management, but people are getting sicker. There was a really interesting headline today. It says, I'll get my actual newspaper. Doubling cash for NHS had no impact. So they have doubled in 17 years. They've doubled the amount they spend on the NHS, but it's had no impact. We are now looking at a much reduced healthy life expectancy. So we can expect, and they're saying by, I don't know, can't remember what it said, we will be expecting to be sick for a quarter of our lives. So those born now will be only expected to have 3/4 of their life healthy, and a quarter will be sick.
That's nice.
Which is really depressing. But what's interesting, though, because if you read between the lines and the agenda, this is Lord Bethel speaking, saying, therefore, it's a moral and economic disaster. And we need to change our approach. And guess what? We've got to move to prevention rather than cure. And we need to be rolling out fat jabs and vaccines. So this is basically, the shocking news, which is appalling, about how much we're spending and how sick people are, is being used to bring in this Trojan horse of this 10-year plan to digitalize the NHS, to spend a fortune on things like weight loss jabs, vaccines, all of this preventative health care. But is it preventative is the question.
They don't know, do they? Because they haven't done the testing to find out whether it is preventative, and it's probably going to make you sicker anyway. And of course, none of that mentions dietary advice, producing healthy food, healthy lifestyles. The same stuff the government neglected to do when the so-called pandemic was live.
Yeah, so this same NHS that is strapped for cash just announced this week they were going to be incentivizing GPs with £3,000 to hurry up with the rollout of the fat jabs, which cost a fortune. So, now we've got within their sort of criteria for prescribing, 3.5 million people in this country are eligible by the criteria. And these are expensive drugs. And this is taxpayers' money. So we are going to bankrupt, we can't even afford to get, receptionists or doctors in front of patients. And yet we're just squandering this money on, I mean, I don't know about you, but you get like hundreds of letters about vaccines you could get, and the clinics are always there. You can always get a face-to-face vaccine appointment, probably the next day.
Yeah.
So I think we have to like call them out and say, this isn't about a lack of resources. It's about what you're prioritizing and what you're spending your money on.
I think they've also misled us about what pharmacists could do, because there was this thing about how pharmacists were going to step in and take over and do some of the GP roles. And I was watching Mike Graham this morning on his show, and he's had a bad finger for a few days. And his story was quite interesting, that he went into the pharmacist and spoke to the lady behind the counter, first of all, who was very, lots of questions. And he said, well, no, I need to speak to the pharmacist. He's then kept waiting. Then finally, the pharmacist sees him and says, oh, yes, you've got an infected finger. So he said, oh, great. Can I have antibiotics, please? She said, no, you've got to go and see your doctor. But I thought that you were able to do this now, that you can prescribe. You've just diagnosed what it is. I knew what it was anyway. I just want some antibiotics. No, you've got to see your doctor. So he walked out without antibiotics. I mean, this is just nuts. I mean, supposedly he's saving the doctor's time. It took 5 minutes chat to a pharmacist. Could have walked out with antibiotics and been healed in a couple of days.
I know, and what's scary is they did announce that was going to be taking the weight off the off the GPs and A&E. But we had exactly the same experience. My daughter needed an emergency drug at the weekend, and our nearest open pharmacy was 15 miles away.
Wow.
Back in the day, you had one in every town. Like I remember when I was a child, if you needed something on a Sunday afternoon, there was one pharmacy that was the designated one. So what is going on? How can they say on the actions speak louder than words? They're saying, oh yes, pharmacies are going to cover all of this minor stuff, and just getting a prescription, a repeat prescription. But no, it turns out you have to be able to drive like 15 miles when you live in a big town. And the nearest one after that was about 20 miles. So it wasn't, this is just insane.
Yeah. So we need more of these stories, don't we? And we said we were going to ask our viewers and listeners that if they've got similar stories, any stories like that, with interaction with GPs, hospitals,
Pharmacies.
where, pharmacy, where you're just not getting the service, please send us a quick email to podcast@ukmedfreedom.org. That's podcast@ukmedfreedom.org. I'll collate them, get them to Liz, and we'll start looking at these stories and see what we can follow up, because this is getting ridiculous. Because the NHS keeps telling us they've got no money, and yet they've been given so much money, which just seems to just get squandered, just disappears down the drain.
Well, it disappears into farmers' coffers, basically.
Well, yeah.
Because it's, how much money did we spend on the COVID jabs? How much money are we spending on the Ozempic and Monjuro and all of those? This is where the money's going, because pharma have basically hijacked the whole system and created a system which will flow taxpayers' money straight to them. Because if doctors only have a phone call or a 5-minute consultation, what else are they going to do except for prescribe a drug?
Right.
And if people are desperate, they'll take anything they can get, won't they?
Yeah, and their systems are telling them what drugs to prescribe as well. They're not even really deciding, I don't think. I think they're going through some screens on their computer. I know we've said this before, but I mean, I witnessed it personally, years ago, not even recently. Just flick. Oh, the computer says you've got this and I need to prescribe you that. Well, I could do that, I'm pretty sure, if you give me the right screens to go through. It's just ridiculous.
The
doctors
other thing
they're not making clinical decisions, are they? The doctors, they're not examining and doing a full holistic look at you.
I mean, they're basically starting to write themselves out of a job, aren't they? Because, their skills will go down. And also, like, AI can just do a phone call tick list.
Mm.
AI can't do a clinical examination and, pick up cues from patients. So they're just writing that out of the process. So then AI can take over. So I think, doctors need to start fighting back and reclaiming their profession as well, because this is a very worrying sort of pathway we're on.
Well, also the whole thing about informed consent goes out the window.
Yeah.
For me. So I mean, as you know, we were looking at definitions of informed consent, medical choice, for example, and for me, it feels like not only the patient but the doctor must fully understand why they're prescribing something, what that is they're prescribing, and how it's going to affect that individual on a holistic basis, not just the symptom that they think they're treating. What is the long-term or short or even short-term effect of this particular drug or this particular intervention? And I can't see how they can possibly know that if they haven't got the person in front of them and they're not really looking at their history.
Mm-hmm.
And they've not really studied properly the history of the ailment that's being presented. How do they know whether that's the right medicine to prescribe? How can they possibly give any warnings about side effects? If they don't, do they really know what's in this drug? Do they know how it affects people on an individual basis as opposed to a group thing? Because this whole group thing, in terms of prescribing, seems to come into play. Oh, well, it's okay for the majority, so it'll probably be okay for you. Probably, it's all a bit wishy-washy and unsatisfactory, and yet they'll do that just to get through the appointment. Again, tick the box at the end. Yes, I've done this. I've prescribed this. This is the pharmaceutical that's recommended, of course, and that's what gets prescribed.
Yeah. And increasingly, they're just prescribing on test results. So interestingly, when I was trained, we were told the test was your last thing that you looked at, and that had to, you ordered your test on the basis of your differential diagnosis that you got from the history and the examination.
Right.
Whereas now it's just like quick phone call or blood test, having done an e-consult or whatever. And then and it's done on the test, but you can't ever understand a test result without the context
of
the history and the examination.
That result? Yeah.
But they see the test result and then say, oh, therefore you need X. But yes, without thinking, is this the right treatment for this person? And what are the benefits? What are the risks?
Exactly. Yeah. Well, this is what I said to David the other day on our chat. So, folks, please do go onto our channels and find these videos, because you'll find them very interesting. Sarah's case and David's case. As I said to him, even from a standard project management point of view, before you start a project, you always do your risk benefit analysis. Just straightforward things like that, and that translates perfectly into health, because it should be the same approach. What am I doing here? Why am I doing it? What's the risk of me doing this? What's the risk of doing nothing? It could be that do nothing is the right answer, the
best option, for that person.
Exactly.
And
therefore the consultation can finish right now, because you'll be fine in a few days. Go, take an aspirin and put your feet up and drink plenty. You'll be fine. It could be as simple as that.
Yeah, and that's how we've ended up with antibiotic resistance, isn't it? Because people were just giving them out like Smarties. So it's having the wisdom, isn't it, to know when it's better to leave well alone, or doing nothing is better than doing something. And I wanted to end with some good news.
Oh, that's good.
I hope everyone's signed up to our Substack, because that's where we put out everything first now. So please do sign up to that, and you can donate to us through the Substack as well. And we're really grateful for any donations. So our latest Substack, I did a slot for UK column just this week on stuff around gender medicine in the NHS, which is another area where the NHS is spending a lot of time and effort and money. And one thing we had been particularly campaigning on earlier or later in the autumn last year was this puberty blocker trial, where they were the NHS were going to pay for a a trial to experiment on children from about 10 years and upwards to stop their puberty for 2 years if they were gender confused. And this was, I mean, there's been a massive public backlash against this. There's been a government petition that reached 142,000 signatures. So you can see my whole slot on that on our Substack, and it'll come out on Rumble shortly on our channel. But really good news, the puberty blocker trial was actually paused by the MHRA last week because they realised they were facing a judicial review, which was launched by the Bayswater Group, who was a big group of parents. And that was questioning the ethics approval process. So this is all about ethics. And I think the MHRA on the back of that have panicked because it's not ethical to be experimenting on children with drugs where they literally admit in their latest documents they don't know the risk, but they know it can cause infertility, bone thinning, vertebral fractures, vaginal bleed. I mean, the list is horrific. And these are healthy, biologically healthy children. So that is a very almost impossible to be able to give informed consent for your child to lose their fertility on an experiment. You know, we don't, because, you know, the CAS review showed that there was no evidence that it reduced suicidal risk, which is often a reason given. So there is nothing really in favour of it. And all it is she said, well, you know, we could do with a bit more evidence. So maybe, but then that's not really ethical to use children as guinea pigs.
In what world do you experiment on children anyway? I mean,
Exactly.
it's just
and to do something so massive as stop their sexual development, which will leave them also maybe unable to sexually function properly for their whole life or have children themselves. I mean,
I know the word literary is used a lot, but it's literally anti-human. It's inhuman to do that. You know, you're not allowing the human body to do what the human body does. It's appalling.
But I think this has really shown what a pushback, you know, and the media also were pushing back against it because everyone was like, no, this is not right. This is not moral. You know, and actually that the MHRA have stopped the trial temporarily is very exciting news, I think, for medical ethics, because you know, we have to insist that you can't just practice medicine in a moral or ethical vacuum. We have to keep the framework to stop terrible, terrible abuses and atrocities from happening, which they will if you remove ethics. You know, for whatever your reason is, because sometimes people say for the greater good, or, you know, the ends justifies the means. But actually, no, people get terribly harmed and die when you remove medical ethics.
Absolutely. No, that's shocking, but as you say, extremely good news, and I just hope that continues. And I think maybe the more independent media that there is, and I don't think we intended to, but I think we've fallen into this now that we're part of the independent media circle, albeit a small part, but we're there, and the more we speak about this, the better. And I do urge anyone watching these videos to please circulate them amongst your friends and family. You know, the more views, the better. Not for our benefit. It's really, we'd like to get it out there, but it's for your benefit. You know, because you need to understand what's going on in the world, and why these things are happening, because it's not right.
Looking at the big picture, isn't it, and having the conversations, because a lot of this is taboo in sort of the mainstream, but actually we need to be talking about why you can't just be compassionate, you know, and say this poor child wants to be a different sex, so therefore we have to allow this, because there has to be an idea of the bigger picture and the arguments against, and how can we deal with this in a different way that looks after that individual but doesn't, you know, cause, you know, where the cure isn't worse than the disease, which I think is, you know, what the Hippocratic Oath has always sought to do. First, do no harm.
And the problem is that they think they're doing good, but the problem is the harm comes out later, because what we're doing is irreversible. That's the problem. It's you know, if something's reversible, okay, maybe you could say, well, let them try this for a bit, and they'll soon get, you know, they'll grow out of it, and then that's fine. But this is irreversible stuff. It's really not good at all. You know, I mean, boys and girls have played together as kids forever, and boys have dressed up in girls' stuff, and girls have dressed up in boys' stuff, and it's just all a bit of fun and a laugh. And like, it's just the way it always has been. I mean, you even go back to the Greek theatre and things like that, where there were men, and even Shakespearean times, men acting as women to play the women's parts and things like that. But it's not permanent. It's acting. It's play acting. It's play, and it's fun.
And it's experimentation. But yeah,
Right.
you don't need to medicalize it and then, actually sort of cause permanent mutilation or sterilization and all these terrible sort of castration, which is effectively what you're doing.
Yeah, and we've seen, haven't we, people get later in life regret it. They say, I didn't know, I really wish I hadn't done this, and now there's no way back.
And that's Kira Bell, who is a detransitioner who transitioned in her teenage years. She did the puberty blockers, she did the cross-sex hormone, she became, masculinized, deeply regretted it, has tried sort of change back as much as she can. She's part of this legal action against the MHRA, and because she's the person it really didn't work for, and I suspect she is infertile, which is she's got to live with for the rest of her life.
Yeah, it's very sad.
Very sad.
Anyway, but as you say, it was a bit of good news to finish with, and the fact that they've backed off a bit. So so we need them all to back off. The GMC needs to back off and do its job that it was set up to do, and so do lots of other agencies around the country and the world. They need to start behaving in the way they were set up to behave.
Yeah, definitely. Thank you so much for having me on here. We should probably stop there, shouldn't we?
Yeah, and we'll do some more later in the year. Thank you very much. Okay, thanks folks, and do like, subscribe, and all that stuff, and if you do fancy donating a little, it's always helpful. You can go onto our website at ukmedfreedom.org, where you can sign up for newsletters and you can donate a little. So thank you very much for your time, and we'll see you again soon. Bye for now.
See you soon. Bye.
I think this is a great time to remind you that when you get to the end of the video, if you're watching it on YouTube, you will find 2 links to further videos, which I'm sure you will find fascinating. And it's also a great time to remind you to click follow and like and subscribe, so you're alerted when our new videos are published.